What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Braves, and I'm back with some more Diablo 4 content to bring to the channel. Now today we're going to be discussing a very important unique that does belong in the Rogue's arsenal, and this is going to be Skyhunter. I've managed to put this in and tried to slot this into one of my builds, and I wanted to be able to bring kind of like the results of that kind of investigation, of that testing, just so you have an idea as to if Skyhunter is worth being able to put into a lot of builds, or kind of like a couple of niches that it potentially could fill. If you do enjoy this kind of content, then make sure to drop a like and subscribe on the channel. It really does help the channel out, and we are looking to push for that 5k sub goal for the end of the year, so if you can help us out with that and dropping us a like and subscribe, really would appreciate it. But with all that said and done, what are we waiting for? Let's get right into the video. Okay, so as it currently stands, I am still rocking my Rainbow Barrage build. I'm really thoroughly enjoying that, and I am trying to push the extra damage just that little bit further, and you've probably seen some of the extra videos of me talking about some extra things that I've kind of done to make it a little bit better. But what I want to talk about today is how does Skyhunter kind of fare into that, considering that Barrage does actually trigger an additional ricochet every single time we land a critical strike, and overall I think that ability is kind of like left here and there. I think the ricochets are kind of underestimated when it comes to that ability, because it is absolutely amazing when it comes to mobbing, and it's so good when using with imbuement skills. So let's talk about Skyhunter. What's so special about it? Well, it is a bow that does mean that it rolls with damage to distant enemies, which kind of helps out with the ricochets most importantly, but most of the time isn't really a big factor. We also have a roll into dexterity, which is huge. We have a roll into marksman skill damage, which goes straight into our puncture and our barrage. We also have a roll into critical strike damage, which is perfect for what this unique is trying to do. And we also have a very exclusive roll here, which is 3 ranks into the exploit passive. I'll talk about that a little bit later on, because there are a couple of things in the skill tree that this weapon does really lend itself to, but just know that this is huge, and I honestly wish this was available on more weapons. In terms of the unique ability on this, the first direct damage you deal to an enemy is a guaranteed critical strike, and if you had maximum stacks with the precision key passive when you cast the skill, you also gain anywhere between 15 to 25 energy, and this can only happen once per cast. This does mean that you can use this in like unlimited energy builds, and it also does help out with using some other abilities as well, because most notably unlimited energy is kind of referred to with rapid fire, but this can be used on other abilities once you get your build set up. So let's talk about what it can do in terms of the skill tree. What does it actually manage to achieve? Well, obviously we are getting some extra critical strike damage, which is huge. As a rogue, we will be doing quite a lot of critical strikes and also a lot of damage multipliers straight into that. In terms of like everything here, it doesn't do too much, I suppose. I mean, critical strikes will always slow when it comes to puncture, which is, you know, kind of neither here or there. Obviously with barrage, we have already talked about enhanced barrage, meaning that when we critically strike, we will be doing getting a 100% chance to ricochet, which is huge. That means that we will be sending arrows here, there, and everywhere within a mob. So it just gives you that nice consistency. When it comes to like other abilities, like for example, we have like rapid fire. It does mean that you can go into this one instead, where rapid fire deals increased critical strike damage after you evade, which is kind of neither here or there. I do think improved is always going to be the better shout for unlimited energy. Twisting blades, you're just pretty much going to be getting some extra kind of like damage on that, which is, you know, once again kind of nice. So this bow does work with melee abilities, so it does mean the first time you deal damage, you will be getting a critical strike, whether that's a ranged ability or whether that's a melee one. In terms of like flurry, you do have things like crowd control. You can get to do things like here. It doesn't really do too much there, just increases the amount of damage. Penetrating shot is kind of huge, because obviously you will be doing more damage when you pierce through enemies, and you do like to be able to increase slightly your critical strike chance, so you do have things like that. We've already talked about rapid fire, but I do think the main thing that really kind of helps out here, especially in the case of barrage, and probably most importantly twisting blades as well, is going to be things like siphoning strikes. When you critically strike close enemies, you will be healing for 3% of your maximum life, so this is absolutely amazing, and because of the amount of enemies that you can hit with a single barrage, meaning that because as long as you're standing right next to them, you will be healing a buttload of health with this. Now lastly, the last couple nodes that I do want to touch on, we're going to be having a look at some of the imbuements. So imbuements work really nicely with this critical strike damage. Most importantly, if you use cold imbuements and then you go all the way to mixed and combine it with frigid finesse, you will be getting some really nice damage output right there and then, just because you will be crowd controlling enemies quite often. So you will be increasing this amount of damage and then adding a multiplier for even more damage once you hit them with that, so that's kind of nice. Poison imbuement, if you do go to blended, means that you're going to consistently be doing doing 75% increased poisoning damage, which is quite nice to have. And with Shadow Imbuement, and I feel like this is the most important one because this will also touch on another node in the skill tree, when we get our Shadow Explosion, all of these are going to be doing critical damage, which is huge. Obviously that does filter into all of our multipliers, but this also filters into the real kind of deal, and this is going to be exploit because we have those extra points into it. If you do have 3 points from your skill tree, 3 points from your amulet, and 3 points from the weapon, that does mean you will be doing 54% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. Now of course the first time you hit an enemy, that will be treated as healthy because they will be above 80% of their life, so you will be getting this as a massive damage increase right there and then. But on top of that, all of your explosions when they hit a mob, because the majority of them are never going to have been hit before but until this explosion happens, will all be healthy, and that does mean that you will be getting this 54% increased damage right there and then into your explosion, and this just absolutely decimates mobs right there and then. But of course the main synergy that's going to be coming with this weapon is going to be the key passive, and that is going to be precision. Not only is this centered around being able to get critical strikes with your marksman skills, to be able to get increased critical strike damage, which goes straight back into the weapon, but it's also how we get our critical stacks all the way up to full to benefit from that extra energy that we're going to be having coming our way, getting all the way up to 5 stacks, and getting obviously an increase to our damage and also guaranteed critical strike, but then also having that extra energy come our way. So all in all, Skyhunter has a lot of synergy when it comes to the rogue and its playstyle as well as its skill tree, so why is it not really considered to like a must-have when it comes to a lot of these builds? Well, for starters, it does actually fall a little bit short when it comes to a multitude of areas, so let's have a quick look through those. So obviously when it comes to the rolls, we are missing out on quite a lot of damage that we could have been having. So for example, Marksman's skill damage roll is not really ideal when we go for a majority of items. While it is still technically decent, it's just not perfect, and also because it is a bow, we are missing out on that vulnerable damage multiplier, which would definitely be preferable compared to something like the distance damage to distant enemies. But if we compare this to my current crossbow, the one that I have been using when it comes to the rainbow kind of barrage, this is the one I'm currently using with the cross axe of branching volleys. So you can see like the difference in damage, you can see the difference in attack speed, you can see kind of the rolls that we are looking to be able to get. The only one that I will draw your attention away from is going to be that damage to poison enemies. I am looking out for something a little bit better. Something like critical strike damage would be absolutely perfect, and then all the other kind of rolls would work perfectly with everything else. So with a crossbow, you are getting extra base damage, which is huge because that means all of your abilities are going to have that extra damage potential, and while they will be coming out a little bit slower, they will be cast a little bit slower compared to something like the bow, and while it is substantial when you actually put it into kind of gameplay terms as to how that all kind of works, the extra damage potential more than makes up for it, and is actually preferable when it comes to endgame, because the faster you can kill enemies, the less likely they're going to be able to hit you, and the less chance they're going to have to be able to kill you overall. But of course, one of the main drawbacks that does come from it is that going for Skyhunter means that you've got to value that unique ability as being better than having a double ability effect when it comes to your aspects. Now, of course, with the legendary, you can put anything in there. Obviously, if it's attack focused, you can't put every single aspect in there. But I have gone for the barrage arrows. I have gone for branching volleys, meaning that our barrage arrows have a 50% chance to split into those 2 arrows whenever they ricochet. So you do have like some that are going to be better. You do have some that this unique ability is actually going to be preferable. Like for example, Skyhunter is a guaranteed ricochet, whereas with branching volleys as it currently stands, I am very reliant on my critical strike chance, and while I do have ways to increase it, it's never 100% guaranteed. So if consistency was the name of the game, then Skyhunter would be the better one. You definitely would take that over something like a legendary crossbow, but the legendary crossbow makes up for sustained fights. If you are going into like a fight, the Skyhunter does more than enough to be able to do mobbing, whereas when it comes to bossing, you kind of want that extra damage potential. And yes, okay, you could go back and forth and you could do some gear swaps and everything like that. That's definitely an option, and that does mean that you could take Skyhunter along with a crossbow. But overall, if you want consistency, if you want that damage output rather than the actual critical strikes or anything like that, then a crossbow is going to be doing so much more for you than what Skyhunter possibly could. So the only real drawback to Skyhunter is going to be its damage potential, and also, as a side note to that, is also going to be its setup potential. Because you're only purely focusing on critical strike damage, you have no ways to apply vulnerable, you have no other ways to apply any other kind of status, so crowd control or anything like poison or anything like that to increase the amount of damage that critical strike can do. It's very limited in its approach, and that's why going for a crossbow with a high critical strike chance, even if it's not 100%, is still going to be preferable and give you a better damage output than what Skyhunter can ever do. Now, I will say on the record that I do think Skyhunter is a good weapon. I do like what it can do, but it's just not unique enough to be able to justify a slot or being able to go into every single build. I'd personally like to see it get a little bit of a buff. I don't think it needs too much. I think what it does already is actually unique enough, and I do think it holds that place quite well. But if you're looking to increase the lethality of it to make it a bit more of a desirable slot, compared to some like the other classes with their ones as well, Skyhunter needs a little bit extra. And I think the only way that we can get around this is we can go more into the exploit side of things. And what I mean by this is because exploit does proc off the first part of damage, because every single time you hit the enemy for the first time, they will be healthy. We also should do something on the other side of things, because exploit also affects injured enemies. I think that we should potentially have an extra line in there, so every single time you hit an injured enemy for the first time, that is also treated as a critical strike. And I think that little bit of extra versatility could actually pump Skyhunter to possibly be top tier and actually be desirable compared to a lot of builds. Just think how much easier it would be to be able to finish off enemies with a barrage build, but also a twisting blades build if you're able to guarantee yourself 2 critical strikes on every single target once you get them down to a certain threshold. That would also help it out with being able to finish enemies off, but it would also mean that you can set up ready for that injured attack, meaning that you can then get the full benefit of everything that's in your build, rather than just purely that critical strike damage. Overall, Skyhunter isn't a terrible weapon. If you do manage to get yourself one to drop, feel free to be able to slot it in, and it's definitely the best out of the 2 bows that you can get to drop, with Wind Force being absolutely just trashed here when it comes to it. And Skyhunter is like leagues above it, and is definitely the better one of the uniques. That being said, it just doesn't do enough to be able to justify taking over the slot of what your legendary crossbow would be doing, and when things where you can have your desired rolls, you can also have your desired aspect on there, and it also gets the full 2 times benefit as well. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Have you been using Skyhunter? What builds have you been using it in? And what do you think it could potentially do with? Do you think it needs a little bit of a buff, or do you think it's fine just as it is? But that just brings us to the end of the video, so massive thank you for making your way to the end of it. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. And if you did enjoy this type of content, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to be able to help us get closer to that 5k sub goal. But with all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on the next video.